Welcome to the Society Pod, a podcast for entrepreneurs, marketers, and leaders. Here's your host, Jessica Yarmy.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Society Pod. My guest today is a serial entrepreneur and a founder of multiple technology-enabled companies. We have a lot to dig into. He's currently playing in the franchise space with a tool that's meant to help unify multi-unit franchise frontline systems. So welcome to the show, Matt Goebel.
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks for having me.
So I just gave a very brief introduction of you, but how do you introduce yourself when you're meeting somebody new?
Sometimes it just depends on who I'm introducing myself to. A lot of time in an event or a networking space, it's dependent upon the two sides that we serve at Woven, right? So generically, founder and entrepreneur and all that other fun stuff. But at the end of the day, depending on if we're serving franchisors or franchisees at that moment, it comes out a little differently. But I think you did a good job summarizing it. We're a tech-enabled platform that helps workforce management in the franchising space.
I love that you play in the franchise world. It's such a unique world with unique needs. But let's zoom out for a moment, because what is it, 3 companies that you founded? Or are you on your 4th? Did you intentionally set out to be an entrepreneur, or did you just kind of happen to become one out of necessity?
Yeah, it was an internal itch. I don't know where it came from, but it had been there since before college. I mean, I'd always kind of had this itch to do my own thing and to start my own thing, and that kind of path was in my heart. Worked in corporate America for my first 4 years out of college, worked with some great people, loved where I worked. And at the end of the day, that desire couldn't be satisfied working for somebody else in a big company, roughly 2009, shortly after Lehman Brothers collapsed and the whole calamity of that period of time happened, I up and quit my job and decided to set out on my own. And that was business number 1.
Are there team members that you've worked with who have jumped between these initiatives with you?
Yeah, there is. Perhaps not all the way back to the original OG, although I'll give a shout out to Rachel. I'll have to send her this when it's published. She was with me. We worked with a consulting company together. She made the jump. We worked together for probably close to another decade after in 3 different company iterations that I went through. She's amazing. I would still be working with her today. I'm very happy for her, though. Her and her husband started a family, and she was fortunate enough to have the choice to work from home, be a mom, that kind of stuff. And she took that opportunity, and I'm super happy for her, but miss her. But yeah, we've been very lucky in that, not just with her, but with others along my journey. I have had the good fortune of kind of going company to company with these people. And also not just always tech companies, but I've actually worked with people. And so we're also a multi-unit franchisee. And my wife and I own a few locations of the brand. And even bringing people that we work with there that are just burned out of that type of workforce and working with them in other settings and other organizations, it's been fun. Good fortune. It's always great to start something new with a known commodity, somebody that you trust and you've worked with before.
You go from a consulting kind of structure to technology that supports bridal industry in some form or fashion, and now you're in a technology that supports a franchise environment. So those are 3 pretty different things. Are there consistencies that you've seen in launching those 3 initiatives that have kind of remained true across all the things that you've started up?
Yeah. So I would say the underpinning aspect of all of that is just solving a problem, right? In consulting, to be a good consultant, that's fundamentally what you're doing as rapidly as possible, fully understanding some business's problem set, how it can be solved in the most economical way based on their budget and timeline, and then setting out to solve it. Right? My consulting practices, the iterations of 3 of them, were all based around custom software development. So we weren't building on top of something. We weren't extending, say, like a Salesforce or something else. We were truly engaging in situations where there was nothing off the shelf that worked, and we were building software from scratch. So it was really important to fully understand problem set and how you're going to solve it, iterate through it rapidly, and then actually deliver on that, because these weren't inexpensive, trivial decisions these businesses were making. They were making significant investments in solving this problem they weren't able to solve any other way. Moving into the other tech side businesses, right? My wife and I did take the plunge. We tried to do a B2C SaaS startup called Plan the Day. It was actually in wedding planning. It was sort of right after our own wedding and kind of experiencing it, the trying to plan your own wedding and all the fun stuff that goes into that. Again, just seeing problems, right? Seeing the problems that existed in that industry that were put onto the bride or put onto the groom or put onto the vendors and the management of all those vendors, and just thinking that there's got to be a better way to do this. Again, solving a problem. Ultimately, that startup, we planned hundreds of weddings, use the software. We typically got good reviews, but the B2C space is an interesting space. Learned a lot from that experience. Ultimately, not successful, but took a lot of learnings from it. And then, when we started the franchise, so we opened up our 3 locations. That was a little different because obviously franchising is great because you get this proverbial like business in a box. You don't have as much problem solving to do. The kind of genesis of Woven was having experienced franchising from a supplier side, a franchisor kind of consultative side, and then becoming a franchisee. That was the catalyst, right? Of like seeing this industry from all different sides, seeing the friction points and the issues that exist and saying, again, there's a problem to solve here. Right? How do we go about solving this problem? Not just in a custom way for one brand or for one large franchisee that has the funds for it, but like, how do we solve this in a way that can go across brands, that can go across franchisees in different verticals, industry segments? Because at the end of the day, 90% of the problems are the same. Gym, fitness, salon, spa, retail, verticals, wherever you might find yourself, your core problem set of managing an hourly workforce in geographically dispersed, siloed teams, which is franchising, brick and mortar franchising, is roughly the same. It was, again, just another problem to solve. It comes down to the fact of there's an issue and how do you bring an elegant solution to market to help with it.
I have so many franchising related questions, but I want to stay with you as an entrepreneur for a bit. And I'm going to go intrusive with my questions, but it's something you and I have talked about a bit. The difference between PE funding and bootstrap funding or self-funding your initiatives. Have you ever pulled in outside funding, and where do you land on that debate?
This is Matt's opinion, and I have to be very clear about that because I think all paths can work depending on the founder or founder's desired outcomes and what they want out of their venture. For me and my journeys, they've been bootstrapped. I'll just specifically talk about Woven. It's the most recent, started in late 2016, early 2017. We did bootstrap it, self-funded. We were very fortunate to be able to do that. And again, that's probably the first, key prereq is that I used to joke, or I'll say it right now, is that I cheated in the sense that I first built a successful cash flowing business for 10 years that enabled me to do this, right? So there definitely are parameters where you might just not be able to bootstrap something. Getting a tech product off the ground is not cheap, but we were fortunate. Like I happened to have a situation that afforded me that luxury. And I also happened to have a team that could build it and do it, that we'd already been building in this space for a while. That's where the stars aligned for me in my journey. I personally believe in bootstrapping. I think that if you can afford to do it that way, it instills from day one disciplines in a business that I believe businesses need to be successful, sustainable. At the end of the day, just raising a lot of money and spending a lot of money to be driven to failure, that isn't the VC model, don't get me wrong. But VCs and what I think founders sometimes struggle to understand or may understand and take the risk is that the VC is not in it for your success. The VC is placing a bet, right? And they have to have like 1 out of their 10 or whatever the metrics are, right? So they're going to push for their outcome. And that means you fail, that's fine. They just move on because they needed a quick success or failure and then move on. Whereas bootstrapping allows you to pivot and control your destiny as you see fit and what works best for you and your team and your customers. And so I think there's benefits there. Now, on the flip side, building a bootstrap business forces a lot of compromises in areas of just can't do certain things you want to do. You might not be able to go gobble up market share as quickly as you could if you had a large war chest. Lots of pros and cons. The other way I've heard this described that I resonate with or like is I get pushback sometimes from my colleagues or in the network that have taken funding. They're like, well, we want to go really big. Like we want to be this big company. And, they don't actually discuss it, but the way that model works of raising a lot of money early is you're giving up a ton of equity. Most of the time, a lot of control. And by the time you've gotten addicted to the money train and you have to do a few more raises to get to be really big, you have a very small piece of that pie. So yeah, your pie is bigger. Great if you were successful and made it through, but you have a very small piece of that. So your outcome financially for the founder can actually be smaller versus bootstrapping. Yes, pie is smaller, but your piece of that pie is much bigger. That is another realization and another outcome-based decision path that the founders just need to take is what's best for them, right? Like having 70, 80% of a $10 million business is still better than 2% of a $100 million business, right? That goes back to, what do you want to create? What are you trying to do? Ultimately, I'm a capitalist and I appreciate that there are multiple different ways to achieve success. That's my opinion, and that's the path we've taken.
So as you've been at different crossroads in your businesses, who's in your network where you're bouncing these conversations off of people about like either funding or structure or how you're going to set up the next business? Like, do you have a go-to circle or entrepreneurial squad that you tag in whenever you're having these kind of debates?
No, I don't think it's some formalized like mastermind group that we get together or anything. More of an informal, just relationships that are built over the years. You know, real genuine relationships aren't created out of like, oh, I went to a networking event and I have this business card and this is great. And I paid X amount of thousands of dollars to be part of this mastermind group. And like, those are helpful ways to get started if you need to get started somewhere. But at the end of the day, the real meaningful relationships that I can have truly open conversation with are fellow business owners that I have met along the way that we share other common interest in as well. The dynamic is one where we are socially hanging out, but also we can talk about these things, right? Like we can bounce ideas off of each other about what's going on in our businesses. And they could be totally different, right? Like not in the IT space at all, but getting their perspectives on how they would view that problem or look at that is invaluable. For sure.
You're in one of these social settings that you have an idea and your structure is you're trying to solve problems with your company. And so you've identified a problem that you want to solve. What gives you the audacity to sit there and think like, I can solve this and build this company that is a solution to this problem?
Yes, audacity. That's a fun one to phrase it. Anything you set out your mind to, I'm one of these crazy people that believe that, right? Like if you have an idea and you feel like it is accomplishable, like go for it, right? I mean, I can't count the number of failures that got me to where I am today. I mean, but you just have to do it, right? I don't know if it's audacity. Maybe it is. I don't know. It's just so much as like, it's a problem. It's meant to be solved. It's a challenge to solve it. You don't always hit. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't, but you just got to roll with it. Take your learnings, take your lumps, and then just do better next time. Figure it out, you know, and just keep moving forward.
You talk about like failures and we don't need to reference them publicly because like I don't like to speak them, you know, out loud. But like when you have a fail, do you have a certain process around how you move forward from it or how you digest it so it doesn't impact your confidence or your overall entrepreneurial mojo?
Gosh, such a great question. It probably depends on the type of failure. First off, there's the failure of the mundane, which may happen within the week. There's, well, that was stupid or didn't just feel that way or whatever it might be. I think there's the failure of the mundane. You, as an entrepreneur, you have to learn to just let those roll off. You can't even think about them. There's no mental capacity can be given to them. Then there's more serious failures. There's years of investment and hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars that have been spent into something and to recognize that, yes, this did not go well, or this isn't going the way we wanted it to and have to shut it down, which was the case of Plan the Day. I don't think there was necessarily like a therapeutic process I went through. It helps to have a very supportive and strong spouse. My wife is amazing to help me get through that, to help pick me up when I'm in the proverbial funk. Because again, I don't care how resilient you are, entrepreneur you are, whatever, like you're human. You're going to have a day. You're just going to have a bad day. To have somebody personally close enough to you to help pull you out of that, always important. My wife is that for me. But outside of that, like, I don't think I had a process for it, right? It was just so much of the failure did not happen overnight, right? Most big failures, you don't just wake up one day and everything was great. And the very next day it's failed. So it's not jarring. Typically by the time it gets to like admitting it's a failure, you've known for months, probably, or weeks. And so I think that helps soften it, right? To where it's like, okay, yes, learn these things, don't do that, do this next time, etc. But yeah, no formal process, unfortunately. I would say though, the most important thing is just a support system, whatever that might be. Spouse, significant other, best friend, mom, dad, brother, sister, trusted colleague. I mean, just having somebody that when the failures do happen, because they will, it's inevitable. It's the person that you can open that bottle of wine with or go grab a drink with or go golf with or whatever it is for you, just talk to, right? Just get on the phone or meet up with is probably the most important part, right? Because anybody can learn from their failures if they reflect enough, but to emotionally get through some of it, it does help to have that support.
And you also are kind of like building in ecosystem land now. Do you see it as one piece starts to fail and it almost like you shift attention and shift resources almost to soften the blow, if that's a way to look at it?
I think we have. I mean, we've woven as the platform today, we have a little over 30 different individual features that solve needs within the multi-unit operations, typically franchising space, between people management, communication, scheduling to operational stuff, checklist, compliance, accountability, and all the way through to like facility and equipment management. And yes, over the years, like we've released features and rolled out things that honestly weren't either adopted or we missed the mark, right? Where you roll them out and you're like, this is going to be great. We're going to solve this problem. And you roll it out and all of a sudden you realize that sure, it solved a specific niche problem, but it actually opens up the door for so many other needs or wants or other things that ultimately it's not solving the problem. We have had to roll back. We've sunset some features and some capabilities of the platform throughout the years. And it has been nice in the fact that you eat some of that lost investment in the development and rollouts and trainings and all that other stuff. It's nice to know that that's fine. We still have a very sizable, stable business that is still solving needs across many different other verticals within the space. And I haven't actually thought about it that way, but it does, at this point at our scale, work a little bit like that.
To kind of pivot into Woven land, what's your elevator pitch around Woven?
You're a franchisor or a franchisee?
I'm a franchisor.
Franchisor, right. So there is a lot of talk these days about responsible franchising, right? I don't know if you've heard that, but it's essentially that franchisors need to actually start caring about the success of their franchisees, not just selling them a license. So where Woven comes into play is taking the brand and how to operate that brand, operationalizing it, and creating two-way accountability so that franchisors and franchisees can collaborate and drive success versus the unfortunate current model is franchisors run their business, toss stuff over the proverbial wall to the franchisees, and they basically just kind of like, I'm going to come in and audit you once a year to make sure you're doing that correctly, and otherwise send me my royalty check, or actually I'm just going to take your royalty out of your bank account. That model, I think, is dying. I think franchisors in the future that are going to succeed are ones that are invested in their franchisees' success. That obviously starts at the beginning of finding and selecting and onboarding the right franchisees. And there is still a clear separation. I know in the US, we have wonderful joint employer and all kinds of other stuff happening right now. But at the end of the day, focusing on how do you get your franchisees to profitability. That is something that franchisors are just now starting to wake up to. I think, and I'm not saying broadly, I'm not trying to stereotype every single franchisor. There's plenty of franchisors out there that already do that. But I think a lot have been unfortunately playing this, sell a tremendous amount of licensing, collect a ton of upfront money, and fail to build out the support for the franchisees. Franchisees start failing. That's what's creating the bad rap for franchising as an industry segment. And I think that this responsible franchising movement really is looking to address that in a number of different ways. And Woven plays directly into that, helping their franchisees be as successful as the franchisee can be by setting them up with the right tools for success, consistently operating their locations just like other franchisees. And there's an accountability stack all the way through the franchise organization, from that hourly frontline employee to their franchisee employer, from that franchisee up to their franchisor, their FBCs, and all that kind of stuff. And not just doing it once a year during an FBC or field visit, but doing it in real time to know exactly an hour after you sent out that communication, who's opened it, who's read it, did they share it with their team, that kind of stuff. So that's not the elevator pitch, or we just took a very long elevator ride, but that's what the franchisor side of it is.
So my background being marketing, I always kind of think about the franchising world as it's a little bit of field of dreams starts to come in. Like if we build it, people will just come. And from a marketing perspective, I'm like, no, we need to do this, and this to like make sure they are consistently coming. And I think it is maybe an over reliance or an over trust on a 90-page operations manual. Like, let's make sure everyone's on the same page because we have this document. What you're doing, here's the steps within that document, but putting it in front of you at the time that it needs to be in front of you. And so you don't need all 90 pages today. You need these 5 things or this checklist today, or you need to do very specific things at the end of every day or at the beginning of every day, and just breaking it down into who needs what piece of the 90-page document. I think that's where the rubber meets the road a little bit in franchising, and like, how are we actually going to do this? How are we actually going to bring this all to life?
Exactly. We refer to that as operationalizing it. So a lot of brands we work with are very, very good at creating content, and they are very proud of their content, hundreds and hundreds of pages of PDF content, and typically in some G Drive or SharePoint or some other platform that they've selected that's easy for them to use. And they pat themselves on the back, like, why aren't all of our franchisees doing this? We put it in the operating manual. It's in the operations manual. Well, your operations manual is 200 pages long, and nobody's reading it. Nobody. And sure, the franchisor is the old way of thinking to be like, well, this franchisee invested a lot of money. Of course they're going to read it. Of course they're going to go through with a fine-tooth comb and absorb every little bit of it and love it and cuddle with it at night. They're not, right? We're all so busy, especially if your franchisees are typically driven type A personalities that want to grow, start a business, right? Like not many of them are actually reading that with any kind of detail. And if they are, they're not remembering all of it for when that instance or that case comes up. So yeah, we talk about the aspect of how do you operationalize these things? You still need that document for checking that box, mostly a compliance type thing of like, yes, look what we did. We provided this support, but really to take it to that next level, right? And it's not a document. It's not just like, well, we took our document and we shot a video of it and we sent out the video. Well, like a little better, but we're still not there. It's how do you actually move the what needs to be done into the hands of those that are actually going to do it? And I think one key thing to recognize or just this is the truth. So it's kind of like this realization is that's not your franchisee. If you're just putting in the hands of your franchisee, that isn't the person who's executing your brand. That isn't the person that's talking to your brand's guest or customer that's walking through the door. Like those are your hourly frontline workers. Those are your managers, your assistant managers, right? Like those are the ones executing your brand. And so to take this hands-off approach of like franchisee's problem, not my problem, I think it's a little short-sighted, especially from your perspective, marketing, right? You invest a tremendous amount of money in brand building, right? All to be ruined by an untrained front desk person that gives a really crappy experience the second that new guest walks in. So you spend all this money to convince somebody to try you out, to come through the front door, to get that door swing. And if how to continue that brand experience isn't operationalized and able to be executed at the field level, at each individual location with each individual employee, it's not a loss, but it's the diminished value of what could be huge.
Yeah.
So yes, taking and bringing the things down in a way that packages it for operational use and putting it in the hands of the franchisees and ultimately their managers and employees.
It is an ultimate game of telephone because you have your franchise owner who goes to franchise training, months go by, and then the location opens, and then a general manager goes through training. But to your point, the front desk person is the easiest example where it's an hourly person. They don't go to any sort of training at the corporate level. They're not connected to the brand in the way that the franchisee was connected to the brand when they invested. And so you're relying on this trickle down of information from franchisee. Months go by and they're able to communicate with accuracy to a general manager who then maybe months go by or years go by, and a new front desk person needs to be hired. New people need to come in, and we're just trusting that they're being trained in the same spirit of the initial operations manual or the spirit of the brand. And the front desk is an amazing example because you need to hire people who are at an hourly rate very early in their career. And then we just have an expectation that the game of telephone has worked and we've passed along all of the critical pieces of information that they could execute an A+ experience delivered on brand. And then we wonder why there's turnover of staff. Like everyone's kind of talking about the employment challenges. Of course there's employment challenges because we're not training these people on how to be successful within the brand. We're not giving them the pieces that are critical for their success, but then we're holding them accountable to like the whole puzzle, I think. And so to be able to break it down and spoon feed, here's the pieces you need right now to be successful. And if you check through all these things, you are at least a solid start toward success. It just sets somebody up for success who's at a very early and young moment in their career, just to say like, here's what the expectations are. Did you do the expectations?
100%. We could spend the whole hour talking about this very specific topic. Obviously, I went and built a company to solve these problems. So I think it's easy to say I view them as broken in their current state. And you can start from day one, which is what kind of experience is that front desk person getting on day one? And how consistent is it between your locations and your franchisees' locations? How consistent is it between the locations that your same franchisee owns? Is a good question. You could start with the LMS. Larger established brands will have an LMS in place. Again, they're checking a box. They're like, yeah, we have training. Great. Like inside Woven, we refer to standalone LMSs. While by themselves are great tools, but in the franchising world, we call them like LMS Island. They're always over there somewhere. They're managed by your like locations manager, supposed to be adding and removing users manually as people are hired and fired in most cases. That never happens. And so, well, maybe it happens at this location, but this location just doesn't do it, or whatever the case is. And so your engagement rate with that content is questionable. And the hourly employee does get their login to go through the LMS training. They're probably going to do it on day one, day two, and then they've forgotten about how to get to LMS Island because it was so off over there and they forgot their password and their email, and they're never going to go back there again. So all the value that is tracked that the franchisor created is just there. It's trapped. It's off on an island. And when the actual employee needs to know something, when they're actually trying to execute their job, they're left to tribal knowledge. They're left to this person on their left to just, how do you do this again? Like, just show me, tell me. And you got to hope that that person played the game of telephone correctly before you, right? That's just one example. That's just on the initial training. But then like when they have questions, how do they reference how to do their job? How are they held accountable? How are you measuring this, both as a franchisee at multiple locations, but as a franchisor? Like, how do you know that your promotional communication, your this big seasonal rollout of something, like, how do you know which of your franchisees read it? How do you know how prepared their teams are? Did they share it with their teams? Have their teams read it, right? I think a lot of franchisors solve this problem by carpet bombing. I refer to it as carpet bombing their franchisees with emails. Like, well, if we send it out 8 times, they'll definitely have gotten it. All you're doing is training your franchisees is to ignore you, right? You're just training them that when they get an email from you, it's safe to ignore because there's a good chance that you've likely received it 8 other times. Or you're going to send it again and I'll read it later, right? You're just training them to ignore you. There are so many examples of this, right? Where the old way, I'll refer to it, it's somewhat current still, but the old way of thinking about that, like, yes, it's broken, right? It is absolutely broken. Not to get into it, but like so much data today, we'll talk about how that workforce, the generations that are in that hourly first-time job workforce want to feel connected to something. They have all kinds of problems. They're being trained for the first time on like how to work and what the realities of the work-life world is. And it's not what they think it is or what their expectations have been set at all. And so there's an ill-prepared workforce coming in, not being trained and being expected still to do a job with all kinds of labor inflation and wackiness happening. And it's just, yes, it's very dysfunctional right now. But I think that the good news is that they're solvable problems, right? Like we can address these issues and do something about it.
I like the term LMS Island. I feel like the old term or the old way of thinking about it was like corporate's ivory tower. And so now we have a corporate ivory tower and an LMS island. And then we have what's actually happening on the front lines, which is all amazing. One of the things that I see happening with young franchised brands is at the franchisor level, you're obviously trying to extend your runway as far as you can and keep expenses as low as you can so that you can get cash flow positive as fast as you can, knowing it has to be a certain number of locations to get to cash flow positive. And so there's this hesitation of like, we can't add new staff to support the locations, but then more support is always needed across all aspects of the business. You know, to use the marketing example, there's so many different platforms now and channels now that you have to show up in as a brand. Just on social channels alone, there's probably 8 that need to be managed daily. And the constant complaint that I hear is like, we need more staff. We need more staff. And meanwhile, we're hiring these frontline workers who are masters of those 8 channels. And it's just like, talk to your people, like get your people engaged with your brand. They are part of your team. And so if your corporate team is 2 and you come down out of your ivory tower and you join the team on the front line and you say, hey, here's what I need. I need a TikTok expert. I need somebody who loves Twitter. Those people are in your family already. And they would love to be more connected to your brand. They would love to be connected to a purpose bigger than just what's happening on the front lines. And I love that you're trying to build that bridge also. The way I build the bridge is via Instagram messages to the people, and so you're taking a more like technology enabled, thorough way to like scale those communications to say like, if you have time, here's 3 things I need for social media that like could easily be dished out as homework to your front line and like gotten back up to you, whether you're in the ivory tower or you're, someplace more accessible. But I see it just as a bridge to connect everyone together a little bit better.
Yeah, 100%. I wouldn't be able to comment on like the joint employer aspect of that, like what a franchisor can ask the franchisee's employees to do for them when it comes to that. I wouldn't know how to comment on that from the legal sense. I would tell you from Woven's perspective, yes, that would be possible to have the franchisor engage with their franchisees and ask them that, because you can obviously ask the franchisees for that. And give within Woven, the franchisees will have like one button to click to disseminate that to their team. And then it's coming from their franchisee. It's coming from their employer. So there's the appropriate chain of command. It is franchisor to franchisee out to their employees, but the franchisee is the one sending it. They're the ones that's communicating to their employees and asking them to do something on behalf of who employs them. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think to your earlier point, emerging brands, I really have a soft spot for emerging brands in the sense that like it is tough to be an emerging brand in making those decisions. And I think that a lot of getting to royalty sufficiency and stuff, I mean, I think there's royalty sufficiency at different stages as you grow, right? And hitting those benchmarks to stay alive and get enough runway. It's definitely more of a not what's perfect or what we will need eventually, but it is like, we just need to get A to B. Like, what is the bare minimum we need to get to B? And we'll worry about how to get to C once we're at B type of mentality, but definitely a different way to approach things at that stage.
When you come back and do another podcast with me in 2 years, what are we talking about with Woven?
In Woven's journey, I wanted to solve 2 things. I wanted to better connect franchisors and franchisees and operationalize all the stuff we just talked about. I feel like the gap between franchisors or franchisees causes unnecessary failures within franchisees, hurts brand, etc. So I want to bridge the gap. I view there is a gap between these 2 organizations and how they can better work together for the betterment of both parties. And the second thing is as a multi-unit franchisee myself, was that I wanted to clean up this siloed, fragmented nature of cobbling together solutions, tools, and processes to run your day-to-day tactical operations. You shouldn't need 6 and 8 different logins for your hourly employees to do a basic job. That's kind of what the market has presented franchisees. And so those are my 2 primary things. I wanted to better connect Zors and Zs to both be more profitable together. And I wanted to help franchisees clean up their operational kind of tech stack of what they had, de-burden their managers a little bit, reduce burnout on their managers. Like, those are my 2 primary objectives. I'd spent most of my career solving problems for franchisors. And so I naturally wanted to start in the franchisor-franchisee gap. It's probably the one I understood the most. And I quickly realized that doing so or starting there, I was going to end up building just another franchise management tool. There's plenty of those out there. There's some legacy ones that are big, and I won't name them, but nobody really likes them, but yet they're there. And their inherent problem is that they're one-sided. They add value to the franchisor. They offer very little to no value for the franchisees. And it quite literally is part of the gap. Like, they are part of the gap where the franchisor is mandating something out of fiat that it works for them, but it doesn't work for the franchisee. And it certainly doesn't go down any lower than that. Starting there wouldn't have solved any problems. I would have just been contributing to the problem. So we actually started for the first 4 to 5 years in Woven is solving all of these tactical franchisee problems. So we cleaned up that side first, giving one login, one platform to run the day-to-day operations, people management, facility, and equipment, because we need to attract the eyeballs and the engagement of those managers, of their teams, of the franchisees, not because their franchisor tells them, but because we are genuinely solving their problems. They're genuinely feeling relief. They're genuinely getting value added to thetheir business. And we had to do that first. So that's what we went and did, to varying degrees of success, but overall success. I think one thing we're very proud of is we have like a 98.6% retention over the last 5 years with our customer base, largely franchisees, which is wildly unheard of in the SaaS, B2B SaaS world. And it largely comes from the fact that we have hyper-focused in on how to solve their problem, how to support them, and how to add value to them. In the last year or 2, which finally, I'm sorry, leads to your question of where are we talking about in 2 years, is we have started to now work on solving that first problem, which is how do we close the gap between the franchisor and the franchisee. And I think now that we have the franchisees engaged, they want to use it, their teams are using it, their eyeballs are on it multiple times per day, we can now start building those bridges. And we already have. brand communications, audit tools, templates, and file sharing, and these kinds of things. They're already there and then to start. So 2 years from now, we're going to be talking about how did we close that gap? How is there a new way for franchisors and franchisees to operationalize things that isn't possible today or isn't possible in the past? And the impact that hopefully, we're talking about the impact that that's making on franchising as a whole.
The model can start to work a whole lot better if you can do exactly that. You activate the army of franchisees that you've built, and you all can move forward faster. Rising tide lifts all boats, that kind of idea. But I totally see what you're going for. Is there anything that you're working on right now that you need help with? Do you want to throw an ask out into the world?
Just awareness, just introductions. We're a 7-8-year-old company now, but because of being bootstrapped, right? No marketing budgets, anything like that. About 92% of our business every year, new business, comes from referrals. We come from franchising. We hire people out of franchising. We have built software for franchising for over 15 years now. We've invested in areas that solve problems and add value, but we're still a little bit unknown. So any ask would just be, how do we get out there more? Right? I mean, we attend the IFAs and the networking type stuff, and we participate in the communities where we can in the markets that we're in. But, anybody that can share anything in terms of like where to be and how to get in front of these large franchisees or franchisors that are looking to just bring some operational accountability and efficiencies, we'd love to have those conversations and see how we can help more people, more brands.
You know what my answer is going to be. We're in conference season right now, and everyone asks me, like, what conferences are you going to? I just came back from VCon. Apart from VCon, I don't have any conferences this fall. I'm just going to over LinkedIn under conference is going to be my approach. Because everyone says like, oh, LinkedIn's so much time. It's so time consuming. But if you compare it to a 3-day conference, I'm ahead. I'm ahead of the game.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're actually our customers' brand conferences. So the franchising world have heard, probably intentionally, but like all the industry conferences are kind of front loaded in the year. And then most of the brands hold their national conferences biannually or annually in the fall time period. So we're getting ready to gear up. We had the summer off, and the team's getting ready to start traveling again, going out and supporting our customers, right? Showing up, supporting them, being part of their supplier and vendor networks. And so these are the fun conferences, to be perfectly honest, because they're already a customer, and you get to really just get out there and interact human to human. So I love this phase of it. The industry conferences are great. Don't get me wrong. Just like you were saying, a lot of time, kind of hit and miss. Both are great. I enjoy getting out and talking to our customers.
People to people. I will link Matt's LinkedIn in the show notes, and I'll link to all of the woven things. We covered a lot of ground today. We appreciate the time, Matt. Thank you so much for coming on this episode of the Society Pod.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Society Pod.